Hi everyone, welcome to the SIG Autoscaling meeting. We have a few topics on the agenda that I'm going to start with. The first one is from Guy around patch releases being cut, but I think he's not here today, so I'm not sure what the status of this is. However, I think it's just useful to know that this is happening. Until someone has a more specific update, I think I'm just going to move on. So the next topic is from Jack. Do you want to take this one, Jack?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to talk about how we handle patch releases for cloud provider changes. So I know that patch releases in the core cluster autoscaler component and DPA and HPA are going to track with Kubernetes releases, and so only bug fixes only. Is that the stance we take for cloud provider changes as well? Because they're sort of orthogonal to actual Kubernetes API forward progress.
Yeah. I don't think we have a central stance on this, and certainly we don't enforce it. We essentially delegated the handling of provider-specific PRs to provider owners, and normally the provider owners also have owners in the release branches, except for some cases where a provider has been recently added and that maybe the owners file haven't propagated yet. But in general, I think we delegated a lot of decision making to provider owners, and I don't think we like if you read our cloud provider policy, I don't think we stated there. So my intuition would be that it's up to provider to make their own rules. I think
Okay,
it
cool.
makes sense, sort of. Like I'd expect most people to prefer doing bug fixes, but then again, there is a lot of circumstances, I imagine, like especially if it's new provider or something, right? So
I'm thinking like here's an example. So we're in the 132 release cycle. So let's say a new AWS compute API is introduced, and we want to expose that in the cluster autoscaler. If we did that now with the strict policy, then we would have to put it into the 132 release cycle and wait for cluster autoscaler 132 release following the Kubernetes 132 release. And then we would have to wait for, say, EKS or whatever POPs or self-managed Kubernetes to expose 132. So we might not be able to release this new AWS API, which has nothing to do with Kubernetes or cluster autoscaler, for like 3 months, 6 months. I think like what you're saying in practice, what tends to happen is when a new API is released or something like this that's cloud provider specific, it gets backported all the currently supported versions of cluster autoscaler and pushed out, even though in terms of Semver, that might seem controversial because it might be considered a feature instead of a bug fix.
I mean, what I'm saying is, I think this is a decision of the owner of particular cloud provider at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Like
cool.
the counterpoint to having this new API being available in a long time is introducing a major new API in a patch release is obviously somewhat risky. I mean, there is a reason why Kubernetes has the policy it has, right? So it's a balance, and I think provider owners are kind of best informed on the needs of the users of particular providers and how critical that new API is to the experience, and they can make informed decisions on the risk versus benefit. I mean, more so than the core owners, which don't really know a particular provider. So,
That makes sense. Great. Thank you for the clarification.
sure. And for the record, like everything I've said is just my thinking right now. I just opened just to double check, and we actually don't say anything about this in our official cloud provider policy. We basically say that owners are responsible for reviewing any PRs to their providers. So I think that's implied, but it's not explicitly stated.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and submit a PR with some feedback from some other folks to augment that documentation.
If you do, one thing I'd ask for that I know I've seen some provider cherry picks in the past is we probably want to ask them to, if you're cherry picking something to, let's say, 130, you should be also merging this to master and 131 to avoid regressions. I think it's kind of obvious, but also I've seen many cases where someone maybe has a specific problem in a specific Kubernetes version, and they just try to cherry pick to that version without kind of adding it to future versions. I think it would make sense to just say this is a requirement to avoid regressions.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, thank you. Okay, and I think the next topic is from Omerab. Sorry if I mispronounced that, about VPA auto node detection.
Hey, yeah,
Hi.
there was an issue about regarding the vertical autoscaler about maximum CPU for a pod, for the accommodation of a pod, to be able to aware of the maximum node in the current cluster. So I started off developing this feature. It's issue number 7147. And Adrian, if I misspell something, please correct me. So the what we want to do is to be able to allow the VPA to know which nodes are running currently in the cluster and set the maximum bound of the maximum node in the cluster. And Adrian pointed out that we maybe want to talk with the autoscaler as well, and maybe adjust to taints and toleration and such. And I would like to hear from you. What do you think?
So just want to add a little bit of context here. I was on a call a while ago where this was brought up before. And I think somebody from Google was saying that the Google variant of the VPA talks to the cluster autoscaler using the provisioning request custom resource, I think. Is
Sorry,
that
please. It actually
okay?
uses Google like internal CRD, but conceptually,
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. I'm not familiar with the provisioning request CRD, but it uses a thing to talk to the cluster autoscaler to ensure that if it scales the Apple pod to a particular size, that the cluster autoscaler can provision a node of the correct size. I'm not entirely sure of the exact logic. And so when Omar had created the pull request to start working on this, I said, like, maybe it makes sense to just chat a bit to some of the VPA folks and some of the folks who have worked on it in Google, just to make sure that the feature is going the right direction, rather than building something only for it to be rejected for, other reasons.
Yeah, I don't know if we have strong representation from VPA side today, but yeah, I think the challenge with doing this purely in VPA, and I haven't seen the pull request, is it's sort
I put
of
it in the chat. Sorry.
okay. Let me open it. It's sort of easy to do this in a best effort way, where you just look at the node sizes, but if you start considering things like, okay, but you also have to account for daemon sets running on the node. And as you mentioned, taints and tolerations and node selectors, because maybe this particular pod, like I may have very large node in the cluster, but this pod cannot run on it, right? So you essentially need to start considering all the scheduling constraints. And then doing this in VPAs is a pretty large extra logic that we don't have today. So hence the idea of, okay, we already have cluster autoscaler that's essentially doing this already, right? What if we can just ask the question to cluster autoscaler as opposed to like loading all of this extra logic into VPA? And yeah, provisioning request is available in cluster autoscaler. I want to say 131. Or either 130 or 131, and it has this. I think in 131 it has this check capacity option, where essentially you just create a CLD to ask a question like, "Can I schedule a pod like this in a cluster?" And then you get response. Like not just can I create a node, but it's actually gives you a response like when the capacity is already there, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the API is you put a pod spec that you want to create, and cluster autoscaler may scale up, may not, like depending if there is space on existing nodes. And then it should give you an answer that's basically one of wait a bit, I'm provisioning the nodes, or go on, the nodes are there, or the final answer is, no way, I just cannot do that because maybe the pod is bigger than the biggest nodes I have in the cluster, or whatever other reason. I cannot do this as cluster autoscaler. Just don't do this. It's not going to schedule, right? So I don't know if this API as is could be used for this, but that's the general idea.
My thing. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I just said that my thinking was to basically just, if you consider the current maximum node in your cluster, it means that the cluster autoscaling can give you another node with that size, so it won't be a constraint. But maybe I'm wrong here. So
I mean, I guess in most cases that's true. There is stuff like maximum size constraint in cluster autoscaling. So I don't think it's hard guarantee, but it's a pretty solid
assumption,
heuristic.
yeah.
Regarding the talking to the cluster autoscaler, on the last time we spoke about this, I think Guy brought up the fact that people might not use cluster autoscaler, maybe something like Carpenter's in place. So I guess in terms of a solution, where do we need to land? Because we could also just have the VPA custom resource have a maximum. Actually, I think it does have a maximum. Or we could have a global maximum set by parameters, much like we have the minimum. Or we could have something that works decently enough to find the size of the nodes, or something that talks to APIs via cluster autoscaler and Carpenter. Where's a decent solution for this, and how do we find that solution?
I think cluster autoscaler and Carpenter is one thing, but then what if someone has a static cluster with neither? We had a discussion with Carpenter team in the past about building a sort of shared API similar to provisioning request, which provisioning request we decided is to cluster autoscaler or too specific to some use cases, and it's not that API would like to build. And I think both sides said that we're interested in building such API together. Unfortunately, it's not on top of anyone's list, and so it's basically in this state of hopefully we'll eventually build an API that just works in cluster autoscaler and Carpenter, but it may take a while. So in terms of the preferred end solution, probably using that API would be pretty great, but also it's not going to happen tomorrow, so it's not ideal. I think without this, I just took a quick glance at a PR. I think, as I said, for the reasons that I mentioned, of it's unclear if you can, just because you have a node, you still may not be able to create it and schedule and so on. So this is the best effort solution that's not going to work every time. But then again, maybe it's better than nothing, right? Like I think the perfect solution will take a long time to land. So from that perspective, maybe a good enough solution for now is an improvement over not having anything. But again, this is my take on this. It would be good to talk with VPA owners specifically because I'm less involved in this project.
And I think a good enough solution needs to be hidden behind a flag so that you can turn it off if you don't want it and turn it on if you do want it. So in theory, if you turn it on, you understand what you're signing up for. The documents can be clear about how it works and its shortfalls.
Yeah, I would maybe suggest, because in my experience, people don't always read documentation and often just go by flag description. So I'd consider putting this directly in the flag description, just because I think this is how 90% of people discover stuff. But that's such a minor comment. And besides that, it makes a lot of sense to have this as opt-in. And if it's clear that this is best effort and not guaranteed, I think that may save someone unpleasant surprise when they run into this edge case.
Yeah, I agree.
You mentioned chatting to VPA owners to get some sort of buy-in. How do we do that?
I think one way is tagging them on PR. Definitely, there is someone on the meeting. I think today we're just sort of unlucky that way. I can maybe we can start discussion on Kubernetes Slack involving them, and then maybe we set up the date for the meeting where we all are here. That could be one way of doing this, or maybe just do one iteration of review offline. Like that would be my suggested way of going forward. I can maybe start the discussion on Slack if you drop your Slack handles.
Yeah.
Or you can find me easily enough on Slack also. I'm just same login as everywhere.
I'll search for you just a sec.
Okay, I think
Thanks.
maybe we can follow up on this offline. We don't have any other topics on the agenda, but if anyone else had any other topics you'd like to discuss.
Yeah, if we have a second.
Sure.
Yeah, so just to introduce myself, my name is Adam Bruneau. I'm at Google. I work on the managed service for Prometheus, and we've been interested in the VPA for daemon sets. We use, we have the option right now of applying VPA to our daemon set that runs the Prometheus collectors. However, as you probably know, there's some gotchas around running VPA over daemon sets. So I've been given time to work on a KEP, and I just wanted to check in with this group. I don't know if there's any work that's in flight already, but that's kind of my plan is to come up with a KEP that will better address that specific need of dealing with VPA and daemon sets.
I'm not aware of any in-flight risk. Of any in-flight work. However, yeah, I think I would be very interested in this, and so probably would be other cluster autoscaler maintainers. And I'd imagine also similarly for Carpenter, because the one of the challenges with autoscaling daemon sets is how to integrate this with node autoscaling, because in node autoscaling we want to know if a pod will be able to schedule on a particular node after accounting for all the daemon sets. So we basically just want to know what the free resources on node will be. And this obviously changes if you start autoscaling vertically daemon sets. So I'd imagine part of the solution would be some way of integrating it with Carpenter and cluster autoscaler. So that's very locally from my point of view of node autoscaling interest. I imagine there is also challenges on VPA side, but I'm going to admit I'm much less familiar with those.
Adam, when you've created the enhancement issue with the KEP ID, the Namanor, could you put a link in the autoscaling Slack group, just so that those of us who are interested could follow along?
Yeah.
Because I'm interested to follow and comment, get involved with that.
Yeah. I plan to have a draft of the KEP by the end of the year. So that's kind of the timeline I'm looking at, but I should have something before then.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you have it, I think Slack channel is a good place, but also maybe both Slack channel and the agenda of the meeting, even if we don't want to discuss it, which maybe we will, but I think this is also a place where a lot of people look for discovering stuff.
Yeah. For some reason, I don't have access to the agenda, but I requested that.
I think there is an open mailing group that you need to add yourself to.
Yeah, I joined that in May, but I don't. Yeah,
Interesting.
I don't know.
Maybe we can follow up offline. I can, like, on Kubernetes Slack or some other channel, and I can try to figure out why that is.
Yep. Cool.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so do we have any other topics?
I guess just a quick one. I've mentioned this in Slack already, but the pull requests for the VPAs are piling up and we're struggling to get them reviewed. I don't know if anybody can help, or if somebody knows the VPA owners, then they can see if they can allocate some time to that.
Yeah, let me start, because we were going to need a Slack discussion with VPA owners anyway. So let
Yeah.
me start this, and then we can discuss it all in one place.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. So any other topics? Okay. In that case, thanks everyone, and have a good week. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.